Bleeding your motorcycle's brakes can take a long time, especially if you're dealing with a dry system, like if you've replaced your brake hoses. There are several techniques for dealing with difficult to bleed brakes, but I think the best method is backwards. I'll show you how to reverse bleed your brakes in this episode of the Shop Manual. This episode of the Shop Manual is powered by DuraBoost batteries. Get 10% off your DuraBoost purchase at RevZilla.com with discount code 10OFF-TSM. We've explained the conventional way to bleed your brakes before, where you pump the lever and push fluid and air bubbles down through the brake hose and out the bleeder bolt on the caliper. That works fine when the brake system is already full of fluid, but what about when the master cylinder, hoses, and caliper are mostly full of air? If you've got a few hours for a hand workout and several bottles of brake fluid to waste, then you will eventually bleed your brakes with the conventional method. Or if you value your time and money, you could reverse bleed, which is when you force fluid from the caliper up to the master cylinder. This approach makes a lot of sense because air bubbles rise in liquid. In this way, we're working with the laws of nature instead of against them. To reverse bleed your brakes, you're gonna need two intimidating 100cc syringes. You can get these online or perhaps at a veterinary or farm supply store. You're gonna need a length of flexible hose. Silicone does work best, and 3/16 of an inch ID usually does the trick. You'll need a couple of small zip ties. You'll need some new brake fluid, ideally from a sealed container so that you know it's fresh. You'll need some sort of receptacle for your old brake fluid. You need a screwdriver to remove the lid from your master cylinder reservoir, a wrench for the bleeder bolt on your caliper, and finally, some paper towels and rags to deal with any drips. First step is to remove the cap from your brake reservoir. Then use one of your syringes to draw the old brake fluid out of the master cylinder. Now take your second syringe and press the hose onto the tip and secure it with a zip tie just for good measure. All right, now fill your syringe with fresh brake fluid. Draw it in. And then you need to make sure that you free all the air, displace all the air bubbles. So hold it upright and push the fluid all the way to the end of your hose. All right, now that's prepped. Brake fluid is slightly corrosive, and one of the drawbacks to the reverse bleed method is that because you're forcing fluid into the caliper via the bleeder bolt, fluid can sometimes leak out from around the bolt threads. So simple solution there is just take a paper towel, wrap it around that bolt to absorb any drips, and then put your wrench on the bleeder bolt and put it in a position that's gonna allow you to swing it between 45 and 90 degrees to open and close it. All right, time to fill this brake system from the bottom like a logical, intelligent person. Take your hose from your full syringe and place it over the bleeder bolt on your caliper, and definitely gonna wanna secure this one with a zip tie since it really doesn't have a whole lot of purchase. And if there's a little bit of air in the end of the hose, really doesn't matter because you're gonna be chasing that all up out of the system with the fluid behind it. So I've got that secure. Apply a little bit of pressure to your plunger and then open the bleeder bolt just enough that fluid starts to flow in. Don't open this bolt too much or you're gonna get a bunch of leakage from around the threads, and resist the urge to push too hard on the plunger because if the hose blows off, it's gonna make a really big mess. Continue to apply slow, steady pressure to the plunger, and pretty soon you should see fluid starting to percolate up into the reservoir. Now, there shouldn't be a lot of air bubbles because all the air has been forced out ahead of the fluid. That's the beauty of this method. And even still, I like to fill and drain the reservoir 2 or 3 times just to make sure the system is full, and then I will close the bleeder bolt on the caliper and check the lever firmness. Oftentimes, that's all it takes to bleed the system. However, if there's any sponginess whatsoever, that means there's still air in there somewhere. And honestly, your best approach at this point is just do a couple rounds of conventional bleeding. The good news is you don't have to change your setup. If you squeeze the lever and crack open the bleeder bolt, the fluid is just going to displace the plunger in the syringe, Do a couple rounds of that, and you've got yourself a rock solid lever from a completely dry system in just a couple of minutes. Once you're happy with how the lever feels, confirm the fluid level in the reservoir, slap the cap back on it, drain your syringes into your waste container, plug them together so it's a sealed system, and chuck them in the drawer for next time. Reverse brake bleeding is effective, it's quick, doesn't take any fancy equipment, and doesn't waste a bunch of brake fluid. It's my preferred method anytime I've replaced a brake system component or if I'm having a bunch of trouble building pressure using conventional bleeding. It does also work on ABS modules. So hopefully this brake bleeding tip is helpful. It works well for me. I know it's gonna work for you. Hey, I appreciate you tuning in for this episode of the Shop Manual. Now, people like to talk about going fast. We all know that slowing down is even more important. So click the link in the description for an article I wrote all about brakes. It's got all sorts of information. And if you like the Shop Manual, you like Daily Rider, you like CTXP, you know how to support this channel. Make your next parts and accessory purchase from RevZilla. Thanks.